let's just do an overview first. Get this up here. These are about 35 pounds, maybe. Okay, all right, let me back you guys up a little bit. This is a 290A, all right. Now they have different tops, okay. So this top, not only is it a cover, but it also clamps the upper bearing down to the housing, okay. This is the standard flat top, and then they make a slope top also. Actually the slope would be that way. They do have a different shift cover that goes with the slope top, okay. They're interchangeable. If you have a slope top and you can only buy a flat top transmission, you can change out the top with your slope top. And there are some shims under here, so as long as you match up the shims, you're going to be good to go. Okay, so slope top versus flat top. Okay, this is what we call a 2-bolt unit. So there's a plug that goes in here, or a puck, that engages the gimbal helmet for steering the unit. Okay, so the newer ones have 2 bolts, which is more desirable. The older ones have a single bolt in the center. They also have a couple jacking screws on either side to help remove that for servicing. Okay. All right, so that's one difference. Okay. Another major difference between these. This is a fine spline. The later models use the fine spline output shaft from the engine, okay? So these started with about the model 290s. Say you're trying to beef up a unit and you want to put the stronger 290A upper on a 280 or 270 lower, and you pick up a unit, remember your spline may not match, okay? Now you can, depending on which U-joint assembly you have, in most cases you can just get a different yoke, get the coarse spline yoke, and of course you'll have to pull your U-joints, but you can swap them over. Now they have quite a few different vendors that made the U-joint yoke assemblies for them, and they vary a fair amount. This one's got internal snap rings for the U-joints. It's about 50-50. The other half of the time you'll have the external snap rings holding in the U-joint caps. Okay, I mentioned there's a major difference between a 290 and a 290A. So they had a major design revision between the standard model and the A suffix, and anything up from a A. All right, and the difference is this pinion carrier. Okay, the way the bearings mount inside here, the earlier models had a steel carrier that was inside this aluminum housing. Well, when they went to the stronger unit, they needed more space, so they redesigned the carrier assembly here without the steel carrier, so they could get a little more real estate to put bigger, stronger gears in. Okay, and the way you can tell, you come in here, see if you guys can see. Okay, behind the U-joint there's a seal. Okay, can you guys see the end of that snap ring down in there? See that little hole? Okay, so that snap ring holds the seal in. So this is all aluminum. Okay, so and this has been repainted. We'll tell the story on that a little bit, but anyways, so there's no steel showing other than the U-joint yoke itself. So on the earlier models, you'll see where that seal seats is actually a steel sleeve that extends out through the aluminum. Actually, it's flush, but it extends out through the aluminum housing. That's about the only way you can really tell from the outside if it's really a 290A or just a plain 290. Okay. Okay, pretty sure I forgot to mention this. Probably due to camera-induced mental error. But there's going to be some shims in the intermediate housing, and they sit in this register right here. Okay, so make sure you keep track of those shims, and I put everything in baggies and label it where it came from. And I didn't do it on this one, but I usually mic them and write the sizes on here also. If you're putting your same gearbox back on and you didn't change any shimming in any other parts of that gearbox, you can just reuse these shims and you should be okay. If someone else has already been in here, I would double check everything. Okay, so you with a depth mic, you're going to measure the depth of this surface, this register, and then you're going to also measure how the stick out of your bearing race. Subtract the two. You're looking for a 2/1000 interference or crush fit, so that your bearing outer race will be clamped between the two housings. Okay. Okay, so where do you start? You have some choices here. You can actually remove the shifting assembly. We could actually pull out the clamping ring and U-joints. We could take the top off. Let's start by taking the dipstick out. Get that out of the way so we don't damage it. Okay, so we throw that over in our parts box so we don't lose it. If you were just doing U-joints, all you have to do is take off this part. So let's start with that. All right, so you got four clamping bolts here, hex head cap screws, 5/16. Now, this one I think is going to come apart real easy. If this has been in salt water or has been around for a while, these bolts are going to have a tough time. They can really get seized in there. They do have stainless steel inserts inside the aluminum, but they still get corroded up and frozen in place. All right, so what I would do on an older one, I don't know if you want to beat on one of these or not, but it's a good idea to take your hammer and give these, some good impact shock load to kind of break that corrosion loose. And these can really be tight, and it's not uncommon at all to have these snap off. Okay, let's see what happens here. Okay, yeah, no problem. This one has been apart before, and it really hasn't seen much use. This one belongs to a buddy of mine who was having shifting problems. So I had another one that I had sold him. That he's using right now, and this is his old one. He just asked me, hey, can you go through this when you get a chance to check it out for me? All right. Okay, you got a washer on each one, so make sure you keep track of those. You could do this with an impact, but you got to be very careful, because if it starts to bind or gall, you don't want these getting hung up in there. I always prefer the manual method. Okay, we got all four out. All right. Now, usually we got to take a soft hammer and sometimes it takes a lot of persuasion. Okay. Many times you got to get in here with a real sharp chisel and just carefully put her on there. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, we got some shims on here. We got an O-ring. These shims are easy to keep track of because they're the only ones with bolt holes. But I still put them in a baggie. All right. And just doing a visual on the gear while we have it out. And initial inspection looks pretty good. The contact pattern looks good. Okay. All right, so I'm going to take these shims off and put them in a baggie. So just in case we take them off and we're not paying attention, they're already put aside. All right, I'm going to do that off camera. We got our shim. It's just got a single shim. Could be, could be multiple shims. Every unit. Oh, wait a minute. To show you how precise these are, there's actually two here. And sometimes I'll find that these have been folded over. So you want to look for that. There we go. Okay, so we had two shims. Yeah, sometimes these edges can get folded over, and that will actually add thickness to the shim pack. Just take a look on the inside here. So this is probably the cleanest one I've ever taken apart. This thing's in great shape. But we're going to tear it all the way down just to be sure that everything's copacetic, because this is my buddy's backup unit that he's got to rely on for commercial fishing. Okay. All right, we're going to take the top off. All right, now this top has been off already. So I was going to mention this earlier. So you notice it's different color, right? So the one that I had rebuilt and sold to my buddy, this was the top that was on that unit. Okay, so his is the slope top. So he had to swap out the top. So this is the one that I had already cleaned up, and he just stuck it back on here when he brought it back over. Okay, so you've got 3 regular socket head cap screws here and 1 special one. Okay, this one's an oil return, and it's pretty obvious where they go. This hole is different than the others, and you've got a hollow bolt here with the oil hole through it, O-ring on the top. Alright, so right off we got a bad gasket. We got our top bearing, and we've got some shims up here. Okay, so we're going to keep track of this shim, or shims. I think there might be 2 there, and there are. Okay, so the thickness of this shim determines both the clamping and how much compression you get out of the gasket. This is, out of all the shims, these are the easiest to figure out. You check your gap with the feeler gauge, and I believe it's a 2/1000 gap that you're looking for. Okay, so we're going to go bag these up and put our cover in our parts box. Okay, next step, we're going to pull the shift fork. Actually, it's not a fork, it would be a paw assembly. Okay. Let's start with a plastic hammer and see what happens here. we're going to use a nice sharp chisel, and we're going to try to get behind here and see if we can get it to pry out a little bit here. Okay, that sounded promising. Let's try it up here. Alright, this one's going to fight us a little bit. You want to have a nice sharp edge. I might have to put a little better edge on here. There we go. Alright. Don't want to get it bound up, so I'm going to try down here and try to get it coming off of there evenly. There we go. Alright. Yeah, there she comes. Okay. Alright. Actually, somebody put a bunch of sealer on there. A little more than you really need. Okay. Here's our shifting paw. Doesn't look too bad. Okay. Alright, we're going to put this aside. Okay, so let's just have a look here. So this is from the shifting side, and this is from the pinion gear input side, or clamping ring assembly. This is assembled with the gear in place, everything bolted down. This is your only other window into what's happening, okay? And notice you can't see the gears. You can't see the gear teeth. So, you know, if you're familiar with setting up like a differential gear set or any other gear set where you want to check the contact pattern, you can't see it. So the only way to check contact pattern is to put your marking die on, you know, rotate it a few times, and then you've got to disassemble the unit. All right, so that's why keeping track of these shims is so important. And then if you're changing bearings or changing any components, the process for determining the shim size is critical. And when we're going back together, we'll go over that. So just want to keep stressing how important it is to make sure you keep track of what shims go where, okay? Okay, so continuing on here, we're just kind of doing a visual inspection. We're looking at our gear teeth just to make sure we don't see anything out of the ordinary here. These look really good so far. Okay. And I don't know how well you can see the top one, but I'm looking at it. In fact, I'm going to grab a flashlight. And in most cases, these gears are going to be fine. You may see a little bit of a wear pattern on them. There's something funny right there. I don't think it's a problem. Usually when they go big. There'll be teeth missing or it'll be broken. So these look good, okay? The gears are the most important thing. If you've got a damaged gear, you pretty much have a trash unit. So here's one of the critical things that goes wrong with these. The center output shaft, it floats between the two bearings, and we've got you got a thrust nut at the top and a thrust washer at the bottom, and the end play between them. The spec is 4 thousandths minimum, 20 thousandths maximum. Okay, and I prefer that it's closer to the tight end of the spec. All right, here's a 25 thousandths feeler gauge. It just falls in there. Okay, let's do 25 plus 10, so 35 thousandths. Okay, that's getting a little better. So I already did this off camera, but here's a here's 36 thousandths. So depending on where you measure, that's about where it is. So it's way over spec. So that's going to cause some hard shifting. And let me flip this over and I'll show you the biggest danger. Okay, we'll zoom in and get a closer look on this in a minute, but the bottom side of the output shaft, we've got this thrust washer on the bottom, and it's made out of brass, and these tend to distort. Okay, here's a bad one, and let's see if you guys can see this or not, but you can see that this one here is cupped really bad. It's been distorted. Okay, so on your lower horsepower units, 6 cylinders, 4 cylinders, these are fine. But if you got a V8 or a diesel, those are going to fail on you. So we get these steel ones made up that replace that, and then these are the way to go. All right. Okay, so let's take this apart. We'll get a closer look. We're back in our support here. 30 millimeter socket. Okay, left-hand thread, guys. So it's going to be righty-loosey. Okay. That looks really good. Throw that in our parts box. There we go. Just take your time here. Okay, so we got a needle bearing, cage needle bearing in here. That looks really good. We're going to give it a closer examination. You're supposed to keep these together. Top gear bearing assembly with the top needle bearing. I don't think it's that critical. All right, next is our shifting cone. Okay, and these are labeled top. Okay, that looks really good. All right. And you got a spring. Okay, so we've laid it on its side here. We're going to pull the shaft out. Now there's, on the back side of this bearing gear assembly, there's a snap ring that only lets the shaft move that far. All right, so I'm just going to tap this washer back. Plastic hammer. These usually are not this tight. Looks like it's starting to move. There we go. Got a couple split keepers in here. Try to keep you guys in frame a little better here. There we There we go. There's one. There's two. Okay. We'll keep her rings. Okay. And normally you just slide that guy right off. I'm going to have to tap it out. Just making sure that's centered. Okay, there we go. Yeah, this one's got some damage. I think what happened, it's swollen up a little bit because it's deformed slightly. Okay, now let's see if we get this needle bearing out. Yeah, we'll just take the whole shaft out. There we go. Okay. All right, so here's our output shaft. That looks good. These usually hold up fine. Rarely do you have a problem with the output shaft. Okay. And let's see if our bearing will come out. There's going to be shims underneath here, so we gotta be mindful of those. I don't want to damage any of those shims. We're almost there. There we go. Okay. And this is the bottom gear, so this is the forward gear typically. Got our shim here. And it's usually pretty easy to keep track of which is which by the wear pattern. So the upper one has a larger wear pattern versus the bottom one. Okay. I'm going to measure and bag these shims right now and mark them as to which side they came out of. Okay, so I've bagged up our shims, and the lower had a single 5/1000 and a single 2/1000 shim. And this is very unusual. The upper had no shims at all. I've never seen one without shims, so we're going to do all the calculations and figure out what they're supposed to be. I never trust, I keep track of them, but always verify. Never trust that what you took out is actually correct, because this one's been rebuilt before. It doesn't mean that the last guy did it right. And this is the forward. Yeah, see how shiny that is? You don't want them like that. So, yeah, this definitely needed to be deglazed. All right, so my task right away, I'm going to paint this. So I'm going to clean these the housings and get them painted, and then we'll come back and we'll work on the rest of the items.